if there was any possibility that he could develop weapons of mass destruction, we should stop him. That was my view. That was my view then, that's my view now.
But this is a different standard to the one that you're going to have to take to the United Nations. And we'll come to that in a moment. Can just to conclude on this for the moment, because we've other questions to get to. I just want to put to you, and this is a comment made to us by Sir David Omond. He observed that SIS overpromised and underdelivered. In some ways, were you too trusting of some of the material you were getting?
The most difficult thing when you're faced with a situation like this is that it all depends what happens afterwards as to how people regard your behavior at the time. And I've also been in situations where, for example, when we had the July 2005 bombings, where people were saying, well, look at this little snatch of intelligence here, or the Americans indeed, for September the 11th, they had entire congressional hearings into it. Look at this bit of intelligence here. And so your worry is not simply, is the intelligence correct so that I can act? Your worry is also, if it is correct, what am I going to do about it? And so I don't disagree with you at all. I think these things obviously now look quite different. And as I say, the Iraq Survey Group has resolved some of these riddles, frankly, as to what Saddam was up to. But I think it was at least reasonable for me at the time, given this evidence and given what the Joint Intelligence Committee were telling me, to say this is a threat that we should take very seriously.
Finally, just on this point, I think the Butler Committee referred to groupthink as a phenomenon which is quite well known in these sorts of discussions, where, let's say, the hypothesis that we've talked about is reinforced. Did you get a sense that the intelligence community were also reinforcing your hypotheses as well as it moving in the other direction?
I certainly got a sense that they were. I think John Sculler, in his evidence to you, explained about he was firming up the assessments they made. But when we actually came to the November UN resolution, in fact, nobody disputed the issue of Saddam and WMD. People disputed what we should do about it, and we can come on to all of that. But it really wasn't something that people disputed at the time. And you know, it's just interesting. I was looking back over the debates that we had on the publication of the dossier, and just recognizing that, of course, everyone now has a different perception of this, but at the time, there were people saying to me, I don't want military action under any set of circumstances. There were also people saying, you're wasting time. You're not acting fast enough. Did I just, for example, in the statement on the dossier on the 24th of September 2002, William Hague says, does the Prime Minister recollect that in the half-century of various states acquiring nuclear capabilities, in almost every case, their ability to do so has been greatly underestimated and understated by intelligence sources? Estimates of today of Iraq taking several years to acquire a nuclear device should be seen in that context, within that margin of error, and given that and the information...
Sure.
Sorry, could you go slowly?
Well, first, could you go more slowly? Secondly, I mean, there is a difference between a statement being made by a member of the opposition, and it's clear that the opposition at the time did take the threat very seriously. I come back, and I'm going to stop at this point. By going to the UN, where the pressure would be for the inspectors to test this out, a higher standard of proof was now going to be required for these assertions. It was not good enough to have reasonable confidence on the basis of Saddam's past behavior, but you really did now to be very sure of your case.
Absolutely. Of course we should have been very sure of our case. All I'm saying is that all the intelligence we received in even after the September dossier was to the same effect. I mean, it wasn't against that. And the reason I simply was, I won't go, I'll spare the stenographer and not go back over reading out the quotes. What I'm saying to you, however, is that there were people perfectly justifiably and sensibly also saying, and this gives you some idea of the context of the time, look, this, you can't sit around and wait for this. You know, you've got to take action, and to take action clearly and definitively. And so one of the most difficult aspects of all of this in Iraq is that, you know, people often say to political leaders, quite understandably, they say, listen to the people. And what you find in circumstances of great controversy is that actually there are different views. And in the end, you have to decide. And I decided that this intelligence justified our considering Saddam as a significant and continuing WMD threat, and that we had to act on it.
I think Sir Martin.
Roderick, sorry, wants to come in.
Could I just make a couple of quick queries to try to help us understand the why Iraq, why now questions? Obviously, we, like you, have read through the assessments of the JIC. Was the intelligence telling you that the WMD threat from Iraq was growing?
Yes, it was telling me that in two respects, because I know you've asked other witnesses about this, and I just want to make this clear as to why I believed it was growing. First of all, there were the September JIC assessments that talked of continuing production of chemical weapons. So in other words, this was a continuing process. But secondly, and this did have an impact on me at the time, although this particular piece of intelligence turned out later to be wrong. But at the time, obviously, we didn't know that. On the 12th of September, in other words, after the 9th of September JIC assessment, but before we did the dossier, I was told and specifically briefed about these mobile production facilities for biological weapons. So this was an additional and new factor. And this was very much linked to whether and how Saddam might conceal his activities.
And in terms of his nuclear program?
In terms of the nuclear program, what was set out in the dossier, and set out in very detailed form, incidentally, were all the different items that he'd been trying to procure, which could indicate a continuing interest in nuclear weapons.
But it would have taken quite a long time to get from that point to having a usable nuclear weapon.
Well, here is the problem, Sir Roderick, and we face, again, exactly the same problem in Iran today. If you say to people, well, how long will it take them to get a...
Iran's much further down the track.
Well, there's debates about that, actually, but if you ask people about the nuclear weapons capability, for example, in respect of Iraq, some people would say, yes, if they're doing it on their own, it's going to take a significant amount of time, but you can foreshorten that time if you buy in the material. And so one of the reasons, and I emphasize again, this whole proliferation issue, and AQ Khan in particular, was that it always worried me that any of these countries, if they were so minded, could step up very quickly